Moments before recording this segment, a man is seen on video trying to draw a gun. A crowd runs up to him and stops him from pulling the weapon. I can't tell you what his intentions were, but I can tell you the reason why he wanted to pull out the weapon. The announcement has been made. There will be no indictments in the death of Breonna Taylor. 3 officers who were involved in the raid on Breonna Taylor's home will not be charged in her death. The headlines are wrong. You see, this story from the Courier-Journal says Louisville grand jury indicts 1 of 3 officers in fatal Breonna Taylor police shooting. But that's unrelated. The charge is wanton endangerment. It has nothing to do with the death of Breonna Taylor on the surface. In reality, this was about endangering the neighbors. So yes, the activists realize these cops will not be indicted, and Breonna Taylor, her killing, was deemed justified. And guess what? It would seem that CNN even agrees. The information being shared wildly by activists is completely incorrect. They said it was a no-knock warrant. That's not true. They said these officers fired into her room while she was sleeping in bed. Not true. Not only did the officers repeatedly bang on the door and announce themselves, not only did neighbors witness this and wonder what the commotion was. A man in the home fired at the officers first, hitting an officer in the leg. And the only reason there's an indictment here is because one of the officers started firing blindly into the building and was rightly criticized for doing so. The indictment has to do with endangering others. Already, organized protests have erupted, and we are just now entering what may be civil unrest and serious rioting. I hope things don't get as bad as I don't want things to get bad, but I kind of feel like we are heading towards what may be the worst rioting we have seen yet. And all of this, obviously, is extremely bad news for Democrats. The extreme emotional reaction from people who don't understand what happened in this case will only serve to hurt them more. And I think we all know it. I think Joe Biden knows it. In an article from Politico, they said the riots are a problem that Democrats can't escape. And the riots are about to get worse than we have seen. In a tracking poll on sentiment and support for Black Lives Matter, we see that following the killing of Breonna Taylor, support for Black Lives Matter actually went down a little bit. And I'm not entirely sure why. But it could be related to the fact that even CNN's investigation found that this was not murder and charges would not be justified. And anybody who was paying attention would have known this for months. Full disclosure, I made a mistake last night on my IRL podcast by not getting the details correct. See, even I made the mistake. Because the messaging and propaganda from the activists is powerful. I'm worried. I think by the time you watch this, we may be in the midst of massive, widespread riots, maybe across the country, maybe just in Louisville, Kentucky. But I certainly hope people stay safe. Louisville has already declared a state of emergency. Buildings have already been boarded up, courthouses, police departments, and warnings have gone out repeatedly. You won't be able to park downtown. And I've said repeatedly, you need to get out of the city before it's too late. I don't know how widespread the riots will be. I'm sure many people think they can stay home and defend themselves. We've already seen what happened to the McCloskeys. We've already seen what happened to Jake Gardner in Omaha. And now this man in Milwaukee. If they find their way to your neighborhood, you will not be legally protected if you try to defend yourself. Which brings us to a very difficult question. Should you stand your ground or should you flee? It's entirely up to you. Don't take my word for it. I'm just trying to make sure you stay safe and you're aware of the risks. But it's entirely upon you to do what you think is right. Just please, everyone, stop the violence. Please. Because it's only going to create another cycle of revenge. People will be hurt by the riots, their businesses will be destroyed, and they'll call for more police action and more funding, and they'll target the protesters, and they'll be angrier, they'll come out to rally, and the violence will persist until we decide it must stop. But let's not waste any words. Let me show you the breaking news from Courier-Journal. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are many ways you can give. There's a P.O. box, but the best thing you can do, share this video. I'm going to show you that even CNN is debunking the activist narrative. I have chosen CNN on purpose because it's considered to be a very credible source by the left. And the right doesn't seem to think CNN's, well, the right, in my opinion, rightly believes CNN's not credible. But in this instance, What CNN is reporting, and they reported this months ago, seems to line up with the documents, the data, and witness statements. You can't deny the truth. The activists want to make this about evil cops targeting minorities. That is not the case here. CNN says the activists got it wrong, and thus these officers will not be charged in the death of Breonna Taylor. From the Courier-Journal, Louisville grand jury indicts one of 3 officers in fatal Breonna Taylor police shooting. They say, a Jefferson County grand jury has indicted one of the 3 Louisville officers in the March 13th fatal police shooting of 26-year-old Breonna Taylor. It was announced Wednesday. Former Detective Brett Hankison was indicted on 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment. Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly was not indicted. Detective Miles Cosgrove was not indicted. A wanton endangerment charge is a Class D felony and carries a penalty of 1 to 5 years in prison. The charges read by Judge Annie O'Connell on Wednesday said that Hankison wantonly shot a gun into adjoining apartment 3. The occupants of that apartment were identified by initials. None of them was BT, Breonna Taylor. That means the grand jury did not find that Hankison wantonly fired into Taylor's apartment the night she died, or that the officers are criminally liable in her death. In May, Taylor's neighbor, Chessie Napper, filed a lawsuit against the LMPD officers, claiming that the officers' shots were blindly fired and nearly struck a man inside. Napper was pregnant and had a child in her home, according to the lawsuit. The judge set a $15,000 cash bond for Hankison. A warrant has been issued for his arrest. Cameron said the grand jury decided homicide charges are not applicable because the investigation showed that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in returning deadly fire after they were fired upon by Kenneth Walker, Taylor's boyfriend. CNN confirms this man, Kenneth Walker, fired first, shooting the officer. The officers then returned fire. Now, you can argue that this one officer was justified in shooting, but blindly and wantonly, perhaps not. And for this, he's being charged. Several activists have pointed out that this charge doesn't even necessitate prison time. In fact, he might just get probation, a slap on the wrist, a suspended sentence. Who knows? It is not a very serious charge, though it is a felony. Quote, justice is not often easy and does not fit the mold of public opinion, and it does not conform to shifting standards, Cameron said. I know that not everyone will be satisfied with the charges we've reported today. My team set out to investigate the circumstances surrounding Miss Taylor's death. We did it with a singular goal in mind, pursuing the truth. Kentucky deserves no less. The city of Louisville deserves no less. If we simply act on emotion or outrage, there is no justice. Mob justice is not justice. I have to say, based upon my readings of what was going on, and I will also add there are some leaked documents I'm not going to get into. It's a bit into the nitty gritty. And so for that, I apologize. But on the surface, from what we can see from all of these stories, these officers, they aside from the wanton endangerment, which may be warranted, and that's a charge, not a conviction. It seems like these officers did not commit a crime. I'm sorry, it's just not the case. If you'd like to change the system, I'm welcome to hear it, and we can figure out what needs to be done. But based upon what the AG is saying, based upon what CNN, of all places, is reporting, these officers knocked repeatedly. They announced themselves. When no one answered, they used a battering ram to break the door down and were immediately fired upon, with one officer being hit in the thigh. This wasn't something I don't know what you could change in this circumstance. What should the cops have done differently? Maybe just kept knocking? Well, no, they have to serve a warrant. So they break the door down and they got shot and they returned fire. These things sometimes happen. It's tragic, but I don't know what you think should change about this. They go on to say, around 200 protesters gathered at Jefferson Square Park as the announcement was played on a loudspeaker. As the decision concluded, there was confusion at first, then anger from those who had gathered. Is that it? One woman asked. Protesters almost immediately began chanting, no justice, no peace. Several cried at the grand jury decision. I'm heartbroken. Logan Cleaver, a protester, said Wednesday immediately after the grand jury's decision was announced. This is not a justice system. It's not for everybody. The announcement comes after Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron's office presented its findings to the grand jury earlier this week. His team has been investigating the Taylor shooting since May. In anticipation of Cameron's lawsuit, Mayor Greg Fisher invoked a 72-hour curfew effective Wednesday night from 9 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. Last week, Fisher announced the city agreed to a $12 million settlement with Breonna Taylor's family that includes more than a dozen police reforms. The uncertainty swirling around the decision on possible criminal charges in Taylor's death has drawn both local and international attention as protesters have marched and chanted on Louisville streets for 119 consecutive days. Protesters in Louisville and supporters across the U.S. have called for justice for Breonna and other Black Americans, such as George Floyd in Minneapolis, who have been killed by police. Taylor's death and the ensuing protests have been showcased in news reports and in public statements by celebrities, athletes, sports leagues, and politicians from Joe Biden to Beyonce to LeBron James, all calling for justice and the arrest of the officers who killed the unarmed Louisville woman. Now, they say in the past week, tensions escalated to an unnerving pitch as national network crews arrived in Louisville and rumors spread wildly that a decision was imminent, only to be proven wrong and wrong again. Wednesday's announcement comes as images of a restricted downtown Louisville have flashed across the world. Downtown has taken on the appearance of a city under siege, with plywood nailed across business fronts and concrete barriers cordoning off a 25-block perimeter. Louisville Metro Police Interim Chief Robert Schroeder said the restrictions, long planned amid unprecedented times, were meant to protect public safety, property, protesters, and avoid conflicts between drivers and demonstrators. I want to show you this tweet thread from Greta Wall to give you some context as to what's going on. She tweets, "A Kentucky grand jury indicts one officer in the death of Breonna Taylor, who was killed by police in a no-knock warrant on March 13th. This is factually incorrect." She says former Sergeant Brett Hankison has been charged with wanton endangerment. KY Attorney General Daniel Cameron says the warrant served on the night of Breonna Taylor's death was not a no-knock warrant. Officers chose to breach the apartment after no one answered the door. Says Taylor's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, fired upon officers as they entered. So this reporter, Greta Wall, with OANN, this is One America News. This is a conservative right-wing outlet. Even she thought it was a no-knock warrant. That shows you just how far and wide and powerful the left's propaganda really was. What's surprising to me is that even I got this wrong. I did last night in the IRL podcast. I was giving the gist of this and I was wrong. And I got a bunch of comments saying, Tim, you messed up. And I was surprised to find, yeah, even CNN says it. Look at this quote. "We kept banging." CNN says, hours after Shaw signed the warrants, police began the operation, conducting near simultaneous raids at various locations. Taylor's apartment, according to police, was considered a less volatile soft target. As such, police commanders decided in advance to have officers knock and announce their presence before entry. That decision was communicated in a pre-operational briefing, according to a source familiar with the details of the operation, who requested anonymity due to the ongoing investigation. Sometime after 12:30 a.m., Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly began pounding on the door. He later told investigators he believed Taylor was alone and he wanted to give her sufficient time to answer. As officers waited for a response, a neighbor poked his head out to ask what was going on. One of the officers, Brett Hankison, extended his gun and told the neighbor to get back inside his apartment. Mattingly would later tell investigators. Brett was a little bit worked up, Mattingly said. I remember looking at Brett saying, "Brett, relax. Brett, just relax, relax." When there was no answer after repeated knocks, Mattingly said, he announced he was a police officer there to serve a warrant. "Police, come to the door," he said. Another officer on the search team said he heard movement inside and thought someone was about to answer the door. "We kept banging and announcing," Mattingly said, but still no one answered. Eventually, a lieutenant at the scene gave the order to go ahead and hit the door with a battering ram. Quote, "Who is it?" Taylor had been watching a movie in bed together with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, when she drifted off to sleep beside him. Walker told investigators he heard banging at the door after midnight, and his first thought was that it was Glover. He said he knew Taylor had dated the accused drug dealer during their on and off 7-year relationship. He was concerned there might be trouble. Taylor, who had awoken, shouted, "Who is it?" Walker said there was no response. He said he and Taylor scrambled to get dressed and that he grabbed his gun, which his attorney says he legally owns. The pounding at the door continued. "She's yelling at the top of her lungs. And I am too at this point. Who is it?" he recalled. No answer, no response, no anything. As they made their way down a hallway toward the front door, Walker said the door flew off its hinges. "So I just let off one shot," he said. "I still can't see who it is or anything." CNN, following orders and police procedure. Mattingly was first through the door. He could make out a man and a woman in the darkened hallway, he said, and the man had a gun in his hand. I remember seeing the barrel, Mattingly said. Then in an instant, he saw the flash of the muzzle and felt the heat of a bullet hit his leg. The round had severed his femoral artery. Mattingly returned fire, squeezing off multiple shots in rapid succession. Boom, 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 he recalled. In all, he fired 6 times. He remembered falling to the ground and being helped to safety outside the apartment before hearing fellow officers return fire. Hankison and Officer Miles Cosgrove were later identified as the other officers who discharged their weapons that evening. An attorney for Cosgrove declined to comment. Hankison's attorney did not respond to calls and emails from CNN. Mattingly's attorney, Todd McMurtry, defended his client's conduct. Sergeant Mattingly was following orders of superior officers, was not involved in the planning process of the arrest, and at all times followed established police procedures. None of the officers has been charged with a crime. You know why? Because this story from CNN is from July 23rd. It is September 23rd. It was several months ago that CNN reported accurately the police knocked, bang, bang. No one would answer over and over again. A neighbor witnessed this. And finally, when they decided to breach the building, they got shot. A bullet to the femoral artery can kill you. Fortunately, this officer was with other officers and was treated in time. He may have lost his life. The story is a tragedy. No one should have lost their life or been injured that day. But these things happen in the line of duty, in the line of law enforcement. We cannot have a system where we ask officers to enter into dangerous situations where they quite literally did get shot and offer them up no opportunity to defend themselves against lethal force. Let me just stress, and I mean this with a heavy heart, because I am not happy to hear about anyone getting hurt or anyone dying. And I'm truly sad that Breonna Taylor lost her life. If that officer was by himself, he would be dead. A bullet to the femoral artery. I'm sure the officer himself knew how to stem the bleed, but that is a potentially lethal shot, and it could have been bad for him. And so naturally, not understanding why you're being shot at, and you're trying to serve a warrant that you're told you have to do, it creates a real problem. He was doing his job. He was just following orders. Oh, I hate that line so much. I believe in that regard, the system must be changed. We can never accept just following orders as an excuse for what went down. But we also have to consider what the orders were. These orders weren't to harass an innocent person. These orders had to do with stopping drug dealers and people committing crimes. The warrant was about targeting someone based on identity or some fringe ideology. It was something we asked them to do because we felt that as a society, the things these people were accused of were wrong. These men were shot. They knocked several times. They say they announced themselves. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend says he didn't hear them. It's possible. It's entirely possible that the police did announce themselves and this man didn't hear them. So what? Who's the guilty party? If both acted appropriately, then we would call this a tragedy. The officers announced themselves, used a battering ram because they were serving a warrant. Kenneth Walker, I believe his name was, didn't know who was breaking into his home, and so he fired thinking someone was coming to attack him. Breonna Taylor lost her life because of it. In this instance, based on the evidence, I'm not sure anyone should be charged in relation to this horrifying tragedy. Now, the one officer will be charged because he fired blindly and nearly hit other people in other apartments. And well, and there you go. I think that might make sense. And it must be stressed, these are charges, not convictions. It's likely the cop could even get off. And if he does, I welcome you to the next wave of riots. I certainly hope that this doesn't get bad, but I have to show you. In this clip from BG on the scene, a man just nearly pulled his gun in reaction. Crowd had to stop him. Louisville is on edge. I'll clarify. I don't exactly know for sure exactly what this man was doing. You just see people rushing up, yelling, and stopping him. But I think I lean towards that, being accurate based on what I can see. It's not fair for me to say I know 100%. I haven't confirmed this. The video does appear to show a man reaching for something and people running up and stopping him. I want to make sure I'm very clear on what was potentially happening here. But I want to show you this from Julio Rosas. While the Black Lives Matter crowd was marching in Louisville, a U-Haul truck pulled up with shields and supplies for the group to use. Uhaul, allowing these people to pull out shields and signs. Is that true? We can see that they're pulling up a lot of banners. I don't necessarily see any shields in the immediate. Let's see how this plays out as the video carries on. But you can see one thing that's really important. These protests are extremely organized and prepared. They're pulling out big, there we go, shields. Straight up shields being brought out. Julio is 100% correct. And it's important to realize another tactic used by the far left in relation to a lot of these kinds of actions. Often they will have what looks like a banner, fabric with writing on it. And when they carry it, you think they're carrying a sign. And then when they pull the banner away, they're holding giant shields or ladders, some kind of device to help them or assist them. Barricades. They disguise them. They do the same thing with flags. They use thick flag poles so they can claim they're just flying a flag, but then they can wrap the flag and they have a stick to use as a weapon. Uhaul, allowing this to happen? They probably don't know. And I wonder if Uhaul can track down who was using this to deliver riot shields. And if riot shields are being handed out, I can only guess what's going to happen in the next several hours. The announcement was made around 1:20 p.m. I started recording this just about an hour after, and this video likely was uploaded to YouTube within like 30 minutes of the time it went live. But I imagine you're probably watching this video well after it's been published. And so maybe you've already seen the aftermath of this, and maybe it isn't as bad as I think it is. The most important thing that you can do and that I ask of you is share the video if you made it this far, because, well, people need to know exactly what happened. People need to understand the full context of what happened. And I'm going to leave you with a couple important thoughts. First, from Politico, how Portland became a nightmare for Democrats. The violence is escalating and no one can figure out how to stop it. I can. It's called arrest and prosecute. The reason the violence continues is because the district attorneys under the Democrats will not prosecute. They don't care. They're letting them go. Donald Trump took some swift action, and when it comes to the feds, they've been able to shut this stuff down. So I'm sorry. The Republicans seem to know how to figure it out, or how to stop it. I'm sorry. The Republicans seem to have already done it, but these Democrat jurisdictions have not. And now Louisville is probably going to face the brunt. But I assure you, man, look, maybe you're watching this well after I published it, and you're laughing at how wrong I was. I hope so. I hope. By tonight, I'm dead wrong. But I think we'll see nationwide unrest. Nationwide. I mean, look at the George Floyd riots. Why would we expect anything less? Louisville is prepared for this. Have any other cities prepared? Because people don't just protest in Louisville. They're going to be protesting everywhere. But all in all, this will be a nightmare for the Democrats, and they need to accept it. This is something I've shown over and over again. This is the net support for Black Lives Matter. And we can see that at the end of beginning of 2018, net opposition turned into net support. When Breonna Taylor was killed, Black Lives Matter enjoyed 11% net support, but it fell down within the next month to 10%. When the CDC announced data by race, Black Lives Matter support went up. When we reached the George Floyd incident, it was at 18%. Or they say 17 now, so it's been changing, I guess. It spiked and reached 25%. After Jacob Blake was shot, it fell to 11, dropped down to 9% very briefly, and now it's sitting at around 10%. They've lost all of their gains from this year. But the reason I'm highlighting this once again is that after Breonna Taylor was killed, support actually went down. I have to wonder if people heard the details immediately and knew. Many of us in media, including a reporter from One American News, didn't know that it was not a no-knock warrant, that they actually did knock. They were not given the right to just smash the door down. But according to CNN, the judge was told only if necessary, meaning they had to knock, and then once there was no answer, they could break the door down, as opposed to a real no-knock warrant where they run up, smash the door, and go charging in. The activists might know this. They might not. But I don't think it matters. I think all that matters is they want retribution. They don't care what's just. They don't care what's right. If that were the case, they wouldn't have burned down small businesses. They wouldn't have attacked people. They wouldn't have killed somebody in Portland. These people just want retribution. They want an emotional release. They want to destroy a symbol, something that they think represents what oppresses them. These 3 cops may have made mistakes, may have exercised poor judgment, but they didn't commit crimes. They were shot at first, and they knocked on the door. Even Kenneth Walker says they were knocking, and he was yelling, "Who is it? Who is it?" So we all know it wasn't a no-knock warrant. So what does that mean? It means sometimes bad things happen. We cannot function without as a society if we can't understand that. I hope this was informative enough for all of you. I'm going to now start preparing my next segments and likely begin talking about what's to come for tonight. I have a lot more stories, 3 more segments coming up later in the day, starting at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/timcastnews. Please consider sharing this video if you know someone who doesn't understand the full context. I used CNN, okay? It's the best I could muster. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.